The white lilies were already beginning to tremble in Daniel Carter's hand when the woman behind the desk looked at him and said, with the practiced calm of someone delivering news they do not consider important, that there was no reservation and no room and nothing she could do. He stood very still when she said it, not because he was angry, but because Emma was sleeping against his shoulder, her small fingers curled around the worn stuffed rabbit she had carried everywhere since she was 3, and he did not want a single thing, not his voice, not his breath, not even the beating of his heart, to disturb the peace of his sleeping daughter on this particular night, the night before the 4th anniversary of the day her mother left the world. He had been awake since 4 in the morning. He had driven through the dark to an airport, waited through a delay, carried Emma through 2 terminals and a cab line in the cold October air, and the whole time he had held those lilies upright and careful because Sarah had loved white flowers, and because tomorrow he would place them somewhere beautiful in her memory, the way he had every year since she was gone. He was tired in the way that reaches past the body and settles somewhere deeper, and now there was no room, and the 2 women behind the desk had already looked away. He had bought the lilies at the airport gift shop 40 minutes before boarding, standing in the small refrigerated section with Emma on his hip, letting her point to the whitest ones. That had been her idea 3 years ago when she was only 4 and barely understood what the flowers were for. She had pointed to a white bouquet in a grocery store window and said, with the total certainty that belongs only to small children, "Those ones, Daddy. Mama would like those." He had not been able to speak for a moment. He had simply bought them. And every year since, Emma chose the flowers. This year she had reached up in the airport gift shop, still half asleep, and touched the stems of the whitest lilies in the case. "These," she had whispered. Then she had fallen back against his shoulder and closed her eyes. He had paid for them without putting her down. He had carried her and the flowers and his bag through the terminal and onto the plane and into the cab and now across the marble floor of the Maple Crown Hotel lobby, and he had done all of it with the particular carefulness of a man who understands that some things, once broken, cannot be put back together. Sarah had been gone 4 years. In the early months after she passed, Daniel had sometimes stood in the hallway of their home at night and looked at her photograph on the shelf and tried to remember the exact sound of her laugh, the way it started low and then climbed, the way it made everyone nearby want to laugh with her without knowing why. He could still hear it if he was very quiet and very still. Emma had that same climbing laugh. It appeared sometimes without warning, and every time it did, Daniel felt something in his chest that was grief and gratitude pressed together so tightly he could not have separated them even if he tried. He had built his company, 7 hotels across the country, in the years before and after Sarah, and none of it had ever mattered to him the way a single evening at home with her had mattered. She had understood people. She had always known within moments of meeting someone what they needed to feel at ease. It was a gift Daniel admired and had never fully possessed. He ran a good company, he hired well, he tried to lead with integrity, but Sarah had something simpler.
And rarer than all of that, she simply saw people, all of them, the ones the world considered important and the ones the world overlooked. She saw them exactly the same way. Daniel approached the reception desk with nothing on his face except the quiet patience of a man running on very little. Vanessa, the first receptionist, looked up with an expression that communicated mild inconvenience before he had spoken a single word. Linda stood beside her with her arms loosely folded, watching him the way people watch something they have already decided is not their problem. He told them his name. He told them he had a reservation. He told them quietly, adjusting Emma on his shoulder, that the booking may have come through a corporate channel. He asked them to check again. Vanessa sighed and clicked through the system without urgency. Linda suggested a hotel 10 minutes away. Daniel looked at them both for a moment, not with anger, not with the authority of a man who owned the building they were standing in, but with the simple, steady look of a father who had been traveling all day with a 6-year-old and a bouquet of white lilies that someone had clearly protected very carefully through a very long journey, asking only for someone to take 30 more seconds to look. Neither of them moved toward the keyboard. The lobby continued around them. Piano music drifted from the lounge. A family laughed near the elevator. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Friday evening in a hotel where everything was fine for everyone except for the man standing at the desk with no room to go to. It was in that stillness, in that small and revealing pause, that Maria Reyes came through the lobby. She was carrying a basket of clean folded towels, and she had been on her feet since 6 that morning, and her lower back had been sending its quiet complaints since early afternoon, and she had 40 minutes left in her shift, and every reasonable thing about her situation said, keep walking, finish the shift, go home. But Maria had spent 11 years as a housekeeping supervisor at the Maple Crown, and in all that time she had never quite managed to train herself out of the habit of noticing people. Not guests, not reservation numbers or room assignments. People. The actual human beings moving through the lobby with their luggage and their exhaustion and their private stories. And what she noticed now, setting her basket down without quite deciding to, was a man whose shoulders were carrying more than a bag and a child, and a little girl sleeping with a stuffed rabbit pressed under her chin, and a bouquet of white lilies that someone had clearly protected very carefully through a very long journey. She stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said to Vanessa, keeping her voice gentle. "Did anyone check the executive reservation list? Corporate bookings sometimes route there separately." Vanessa paused. Then she opened another screen. The lobby seemed to quiet around the desk, the way spaces sometimes do when something small and important is about to happen. 3 seconds passed. Then Vanessa's expression shifted. "Oh," she said, a beat of silence. "It's here. Daniel Carter, Executive Reservation, Suite 412. Maria looked at Daniel and gave him a smile that had no procedure in it whatsoever. It was simply the expression of someone glad that a tired person's evening had just improved. Then her eyes moved to the lilies, and her expression changed in the way it does when a person senses they are standing near something tender. "Those are beautiful," she said softly. "Is tomorrow something special?" Daniel looked at the flowers for a moment. There was a pause, the kind that happens when a person decides a stranger is safe enough for the truth. "Tomorrow is my wife's anniversary," he said quietly. "She passed away 4 years ago. Emma and I bring flowers every year." Maria was quiet, not searching for words, but simply present with what he had said. The way people are when they understand that some things don't need a response so much as they need a witness. "I'm so sorry," she said, and it was the kind of sorry that means something. Then she saw it. One stem in the bouquet had bent somewhere during the journey, tilting one lily at a small wrong angle away from the others. Without asking, without making anything of it, Maria simply reached out and straightened it. 3 seconds, the gentlest possible pressure of 2 fingers. The lily stood upright with the rest. Emma stirred against Daniel's shoulder at that moment, blinking slowly into the lobby light, still half inside whatever dream she had been living. She looked at Maria with the unfocused, trusting gaze of a child not yet fully awake. Maria smiled at her, the warm, unhurried smile of a woman who had raised daughters of her own. Emma looked at the lilies, then she looked back at Maria. "Are you going to help my daddy?" she murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. Maria looked at her with eyes that had gone very soft. "Already did, sweetheart," she said. Emma nodded once, as if this was exactly what she had expected, and tucked her rabbit closer and lowered her head back onto her father's shoulder.
Daniel pressed his cheek to the top of his daughter's hair. He did not trust his voice completely in that moment. "Thank you," he said to Maria. It carried more inside it than 2 words usually hold. "I'll bring a vase up to your room," said Maria simply. "The lilies will last longer in water." He carried Emma upstairs and laid her down on the wide hotel bed and tucked Buttons the rabbit under her arm and sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark, listening to her breathe, the way he had since she was an infant, finding in that sound the same thing he had always found in it, proof that something good had continued, that the world had not taken everything, that love was still alive and sleeping peacefully under a hotel blanket with a stuffed rabbit. Maria came 20 minutes later and set a glass vase of water on the dresser without a word, and arranged the lilies in it with the attention of someone who understood that flowers placed in memory of someone beloved deserved to stand straight and beautiful. She left without waiting for thanks. Daniel sat in the armchair by the window long after she was gone, looking at the white lilies holding their color in the low light, and he thought about Sarah, and he thought about Emma choosing these same stems in the airport with her eyes half closed, and he thought about tired hands reaching out in a hotel lobby to straighten one bent flower, and he understood, the way a person sometimes understands things only at the end of a very long day, that grace almost always arrives wearing ordinary clothes.
What no one in that lobby had known, and what Daniel had not offered, was that the Maple Crown Hotel belonged to him. He had built his company across 18 years, beginning with a single small inn and expanding carefully into 7 properties. He had always believed that the truest measure of any business was what happened when no one with authority was watching, when the owner was simply a tired man in a lobby, and the staff believed they were only doing their jobs with no audience and no consequences. He had visited his own hotels anonymously many times for exactly this reason. He knew that performance could be manufactured, and that kindness could not. The following morning, Richard Evans, the hotel's general manager, came to Daniel's suite after the corporate system flagged an executive reservation that had nearly been turned away. He arrived prepared to apologize thoroughly, and he did. Daniel listened. Then he said the thing that Richard would carry with him for the rest of his career. "The reservation error doesn't concern me," he said. "Errors happen in every system. What concerns me is that 2 employees looked at a father holding a sleeping child and a bouquet of flowers the night before his wife's anniversary and decided he was not worth another 30 seconds of their attention." He paused. "And one woman, who had no obligation to stop, who had been on her feet all day, stopped anyway. Not because she was trained to, not because anyone was watching, because she saw a person who needed something small, and she gave it." He looked at Richard steadily. "That is the difference between a hotel that functions and a hotel that means something." A review of guest feedback over the previous several months revealed what Richard had perhaps already suspected, a consistent pattern of dismissive interactions, guests made to feel invisible, requests met with minimum effort and no warmth. The pattern around Vanessa and Linda was clear and documented, and after proper review, both eventually separated from the company. It was not a decision driven by the owner's displeasure. It was a decision driven by a standard the company had always claimed to hold and had not been enforcing. Daniel found Maria 3 days later in the housekeeping break room eating a quiet lunch, still in her uniform. She looked up with the mildly uncertain expression of someone who cannot imagine why a guest would seek her out specifically. He sat down across from her and asked about her family and listened with real interest as she told him about her husband, a retired teacher, and her 2 daughters. Then he told her what he had come to say. "What you did that evening was not customer service. It wasn't something you learned in a training manual. You noticed a person.
You noticed a child. You noticed a flower that had bent out of place, and you fixed it, quietly, without being asked. He held her gaze. I want you to teach every person in every hotel I own how to do what you did, not the steps of it, the heart of it. Maria stared at him. Then she laughed, the startled laugh of someone who has just been told something that makes no sense and feels entirely true. I supervise towels, she said. You see people. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. She went home that evening and sat across from her husband at the kitchen table and told him everything. He reached across and covered her hand with his. Maria, he said quietly, you have been doing this your whole life. Someone finally noticed. She accepted the position. Within 14 months, she was the company's director of guest experience, traveling between all 7 properties, sitting with employees not in boardrooms, but in break rooms and service hallways, talking not about performance metrics, but about human beings, what it feels like to be unseen, what it costs a person to be dismissed, what it means to be looked at by a stranger and recognized as someone who matters. The culture of every hotel she touched began slowly and genuinely to change, not because anyone was performing warmth, but because more people were actually feeling it. On the first anniversary of that October evening, Daniel sent Maria a bouquet of white lilies with a handwritten card. It read, "You reminded an entire company that hospitality is not a procedure. It is a choice made quietly every single day by people who still believe that every person walking through a door deserves to be seen." Maria framed the card and hung it on the wall of her office, where it remained for every year she held that position and beyond. Emma grew older and eventually joined her father's company and heard the story of that Friday night many times across many years. But the detail she always returned to, the one that lived in her the way certain childhood moments do without logical explanation, was never the hotel or the title or the lesson her father drew from it. It was the woman in the lobby. The way she had smiled at a half-sleeping 6-year-old and said, "Already did, sweetheart," with a warmth so natural and unhurried that it had felt, even through the fog of a child's half-sleep, like being held. When Emma was grown, she asked her father once what he believed that night had really been about, underneath everything. Daniel thought for a long moment. Then he said, "It was about your mama." Emma waited. Sarah always said the most important thing any person can do is make another person feel like they exist, he said. Not important, not impressive, just real, seen, present. He looked at his daughter. Maria did that for both of us on the one night of the year when we needed it most. Emma was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the October light was the same pale gold it always was this time of year. "Do you think Mama sent her?" she asked. Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that holds both grief and peace in the same expression. "I think," he said slowly, "that your mama would have recognized her immediately, and I think she would have loved her very much." And perhaps that is the truest thing this story holds. Not that kindness is rewarded, though sometimes it is, but that kindness given freely, without expectation, without an audience, without any knowledge of what it costs the person receiving it, or what it might mean to them in the dark of a hotel room, with white lilies on the dresser, and a sleeping child, and 4 years of missing someone, is the most powerful and most quietly radical thing one human being can offer another. It costs nothing measurable. It changes everything that matters. And a bent flower, gently straightened by tired hands at the end of a long day, can become the moment a person carries inside them for the rest of their life. Not as a memory of a hotel, but as proof that the world still contains people who choose to be kind when no one is asking them to.
If this story moved something in you today, Please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet kindness still exists in this world. Subscribe to the Kind Soul Stories, where every week we bring you stories of ordinary people living with extraordinary heart. Leave us a comment below. Tell us about a moment when a stranger saw you, really saw you when you needed it most. Your story matters here. It always will. This story holds meaningful educational and human value across several dimensions. It teaches that true hospitality and true humanity is not a performance or a policy, but a personal choice, available to every person regardless of their job title or position. It shows children how to grieve with grace, how to honor love that has ended without letting that love disappear, and how a simple annual tradition of placing flowers can become a powerful act of healing and remembrance. It illustrates the principle that integrity is revealed not in moments of visibility, but in moments when no one important appears to be watching. It demonstrates that professional excellence and personal kindness are not competing values, but expressions of the same character. And for the audience of the Kind Soul Stories, it affirms something this generation has always understood, and the world sometimes forgets, that the most important work any person does in a day is often the work that appears on no report and earns no title. The quiet work of making another human being feel that they are not invisible, that they are not alone, and that someone, somewhere, thought they were worth a moment of genuine care.